Well, welcome to the first session of the Ukulele Fundamentals quarter. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different techniques over the next few weeks. And today we're going to start with what I think is one of the strongest identities of the ukulele, which is strumming, right? You know, ukulele players, we tend to strum more than I think any other instrument. And so getting it off on the right foot can certainly help make it a lot more fun and enjoyable as you're learning to strum the ukulele. And so what we want to start talking about is the fact that there are lots of right ways to strum an ukulele. So if you strum differently than what we're talking about here today, that's fine. That's totally fine. What I recommend is that you get comfortable with this method. We're going to be learning new methods next time as well. So it's just this method that I'm going to show is the best to build up a lot of speed and have a lot of control. And it's the one that I use the most frequently when I'm playing. But let's go ahead and pick up our ukuleles, because that's why we're here, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to start with my favorite chord on the ukulele, which is called an F add 9. It's got this big scary name, but all that you need is this little finger right here. That's the only one, your index finger. And you're going to place it on the first fret of the E string. And the E string is the one that is the second from the bottom. So you can see that you got 4 strings. It's the one that's second from the bottom. You put it right there. We're going to talk more about some fretting habits, but you want to make sure you're not touching that A string, the one that's closest to the bottom as you do this. But just to start, we're going to play this chord to talk about some of these strumming concepts. We'll talk more about chords in just a moment, though, too. So now, how do we strum the ukulele? Well, you can use your thumb. You can use combinations of fingers. There's, again, lots of right ways to do it. But my favorite way overall is using the index finger. Sometimes you'll hear this called like the mono finger roll. And what this is just your index finger on your strumming hand using a little bit of a nail on it to flick the strings going down and using the flesh of the finger coming back up. And to start practicing this is what I want you to try and do. Hold your ukulele as you feel comfortable. Try to find this area right here, which is where the fretboard and the body meet. Yours might end a little bit early, but it's still the same sort of area between the sound hole and the fretboard there. And what I want you to do is take your index fingernail, and I want you to try to turn it down so that that nail is sort of pointing towards the ground like this. And I want you to flick that finger down. And as you flick that finger down, I want you to try to use the nail to graze over those 4 strings. So something like this. To kind of give you another view here, you can see that I'm using the nail of the finger and flicking it down over the strings, kind of just flicking it towards the ground. Something really important with this is that it's a very efficient motion. The reason why we're learning this style of strumming is so that you can go really fast eventually. And so we want to make sure that that motion is coming from the finger flicking down and the wrist is sort of turning as that points downward. You can think of it almost like somebody, grabbing a doorknob and turning it. One of my teachers, Aldrin Guerrero, used this analogy. I just love it. It's like that twisting type of motion, while your index finger is also flicking downward. So you'll notice there's not a lot of elbow, right? I'm not going like this or anything wild like that. I'm keeping it very controlled. And after I practice that a couple times and start getting good sound, I'm going to practice my up strum. And to do that, we take the fleshy part of the finger, so on the underside, and we're going to come back up the way we came, coming just up like this, and try to kind of point your finger towards your face, basically. The same sort of rotating motion, and you're going to kind of hook the strings and try to point up towards your head. And that's just the up strum. So let's go ahead and try doing these 2 together. Let's try going with a down, and then doing an up, down, and up. Now, if you're doing this and you notice that it's, kind of like this, that's exactly what we want to work on, is getting it a little bit more efficient. So a lot of that twisting with kind of the arm, just like this. But let's go ahead and try it together. We're going to just start rolling. Try to play along with me. Should sound something like this. And I'm going to count with it. If you don't know what I'm doing with that, totally fine. If you do, feel free to count along. But it's going to look and sound something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And notice how I'm using that index nail going down, and then the pad of the finger coming back up. Right now I'm using that F add 9 chord, which is just that index finger on the first fret of the E string, the second from the bottom there. So Now, what's cool about this motion is if you look at my elbow, it's not moving very much. And that's a really important step with this. It's a lot of the forearm twisting while the finger is also moving. And the reason this is cool is, let's try speeding it up. Let's go ahead and play it all together. And I'm going to keep speeding up. And if you can't play it as fast as me, that's fine. We're all, everyone's on mute, so it doesn't matter. Play as loud as you want. And try to keep up and see how it goes, because with this technique, you can start to build up quite a bit of speed. So it should be something like this, starting slow and just getting it faster. Very good, right? We can do this really fast. And it's because this technique is very efficient. A quick note is you might be wondering, oh, do I leave my hand open or do I keep it closed? And honestly, it doesn't matter. You'll see sometimes I keep my hand open, other times I'll close it. Both work equally well. Just try them both and see what's more comfortable for you. But this is our very basic roll, using just the index finger to start to get comfortable with that down and up motion. Now, a thing that people don't often talk about is how important it is to have that nail sort of turned into the strings. It can be very tempting as you speed up for that finger to get a little bit relaxed and kind of start doing stuff like this, or even using like the pad of the finger. And that can become problematic at times with certain things. Sometimes there's a right place for it, but this technique gives you that good consistency that we're looking for, right? So now as we're doing this, we want to think about how we can strum patterns and things like that, feel the rhythm and start to play songs. And what's really important is knowing that when you're strumming an ukulele, there's a law to it. So you probably have heard of the law of gravity. What goes up must come down, right? Well, in the world of ukulele, that also applies. What comes up with the strum must go down. But there's a second part to our law, and that is what goes down must also come back up. And what this means is whenever we're strumming an ukulele, when we move our hand down, we can't move it down again before we bring it back up. It's not possible to do 2 downstrokes in a row. We have to bring our hand back up before it can go down, and vice versa. We have to bring it down before we can come back up. It's a yin-yang relationship. We have to have both sides. But what's cool is if you're starting to work on strum patterns, just because you have to bring the hand up or bring the hand down doesn't mean it has to strike the strings while you make that motion. So what we can do is we can start practicing missing the strings with some of these, where we're still moving that hand up or down, but just avoiding the strings on it. So let's try this with the up strum. So what we're going to do is a normal down, just like we talked about. We're going to strum down. And then to come up, I'm going to miss the strings. You see how I'm actually avoiding the strings, making sure I don't touch them with my finger. But it looks the same. I'm still moving that hand down and up. So that should look and sound something like this. Down, miss, down, miss, down, miss, down, miss. Notice I'm doing the down and striking the strings. And then on these upstrokes, I'm just missing, making sure I'm not hitting the strings. All right. Let's go back to doing all strums. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. So right now we're striking on both the down and the up. Let's go back to missing the ups. Down, miss, down, miss, down, miss, down, miss, down, miss, down, miss. Let's go back to now doing the down ups. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Now let's do the really hard one that makes everybody mess up, including myself half the time, which is missing on the down strums. It feels very weird. It should look something like this. Miss, up, miss, up, miss, up, miss, up. If this is hard, that's good. It was hard for me too. It still is hard to this day. And that's because we don't like missing on down strums. Down strums are powerful and we like the feel of them. And when we have to miss the strings on it, everything can go away. So let's break it down and try it really slow. We're going to take our hand, be in sort of our starting position. We're going to go down and miss the strings as we do it. So we're going to consciously not touch them. And then we're going to come up and we're going to strike the strings. So miss, up, miss, up, miss, up, miss, up, miss, up, miss, miss, up. It's kind of weird, isn't it? It feels a little bit off. And one of the reasons is, imagine if you're playing a song with somebody and you don't have an instrument. Let's say you're just clapping your hands or tapping your foot maybe, right? Well, when you clap your hands, you make a sound when you put them together. Now, can you clap your hands again from this position? If you can, I would love to see it, because I don't think it's possible. I think you have to have these hands come apart from each other before they can clap again. That's like your down strum and your up strum, except obviously this doesn't make sound when an up strum certainly can, but the feel is very much the same. We have down, up, down, up, down, up. Or think about your foot tapping. It clicks on the ground. You can't click it on the ground again without raising it up first. Just like when you do your down strum, you can't come down again before you bring it back up. And that is why I think for a lot of people, it's hard to miss on the down, because it's kind of like doing a clap, but it doesn't make a sound when you do the clap. It makes a sound when you bring your hands apart. Or when you're tapping your foot, instead of the foot hitting the ground, it hits nothing. But when you bring it up, it hits something. It's very weird. And that's why this can be so bizarre. Some people get it really well. If you're one of those people, awesome. But if you're struggling with it, know that I had that same struggle too. Well, let's go ahead and try with this strumming now. Let's practice going down and up, and then we'll go down and miss, which means we're going to do the down stroke and then miss on the up. Well, then we'll go back to down ups, and then we're going to try the miss on the down and the up. And if you mess up, don't worry about it. It's all good. We're just doing this for fun. So let's go ahead and start it. Down up strums should be something like this. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And no problem here, right? Really comfortable, making sure that we're getting really efficient movement with that finger flicking down towards the ground, flicking back up towards our chin, making sure that we're turning the doorknob and not using a lot of elbow. So now let's just do down, miss, down, miss. Now what we're doing is we're making sure that we're not striking on those up strums, right? So it's the same type of motion. The hand should be moving in the same pace, but we're no longer hitting the strings on the up. Now let's go back to those down ups. So no interruption to this rhythm, right? Should be all the same. If we're going to have an interruption, though, it usually happens with this, which is really hard, which is we're going to try to miss on the down, which should look like this. Miss, miss, up, miss, up, miss, up, miss, up. Really hard to do. It just feels off, doesn't it, right? But that's okay. This is how we practice it. Back into it with down ups, right? So this is an exercise that you can start practicing just to get comfortable with keeping the hand moving as you're strumming. Very basic concept, but sometimes the basic stuff is some of the hardest stuff, right? Simple does not necessarily mean easy. And this, I think, is a perfect example of that. But what's so cool is if you follow this law of ukulele strumming, of what goes down must come up and what comes up must come down, if you keep that moving always when you're strumming, it almost doesn't matter if you strike the strings or miss the strings over time. Meaning if you accidentally hit the strings when you meant to miss them, or you accidentally miss them when you meant to hit them, it's okay. In fact, watch this. I'm going to keep playing that F add 9 chord that we learned at the very start, and I'm going to start strumming. And what I want you to do is two things. I want you to look and I want you to listen. I want you to look at my hand and I want you to tell me, does my hand ever change its movement? Does it ever do something other than this down and up motion, right? But the other thing I want you to do is listen. I want you to listen to hear if the rhythm changes. Not if I necessarily sound like I'm going faster or slower, but rather, does it sound like I'm playing different patterns, different rhythms with my strumming? So here we go. Should look and sound something like this. So. So when you watch my hand there, it looked the same. It didn't matter if I was hitting the strings or if I was missing the strings. It's the same stuff, right? That movement is still there. I'm just sometimes digging in a little bit deeper and other times missing. But the sound sure changed, didn't it, right? Sometimes I was doing a rhythm that was more full, sometimes more sparse, and that was just created very simply by electing to strike the strings versus miss the strings. And that's what you can start to practice with this, is practice different combinations. When people talk about their first strum pattern, oftentimes it's that whole down, down, up, down, up you might have heard before. And when I was learning how to play the ukulele, I saw down, down, up, down, up. Great, I got that, no problem. Down, down, up, down, up. That was perfect, right? no, it sounded terrible. That doesn't sound like music. And the reason is because I didn't realize the motions that were really taking place. You can't go down, down. We just learned that, right? So down, down is actually down, miss coming up, and then down, right? So it's not down, down, up. It's down, miss, down, up. And it's not up, up, down, up at the end. It's up, miss, up, down, up. It's getting comfortable knowing that those motions, just because you're not playing them, are still there, and you should still feel them in your hand. And this is what makes strumming really difficult for some people, but it's the secret sauce that if you practice, you'll be able to get. So if we play this first pattern that a lot of people learn, that took me weeks to learn. So you might get it like that. It might take you more like it did for me. Either way, that's okay. It really looks something like this. It's going down, miss, down, up, miss, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, miss, down, up, miss, up, down, up. You can see how that sort of works. And if that feels too difficult for you right now, that's okay. It was too difficult for me when I just picked this up too. But that's the secret to learning this sort of technique, is making sure you get comfortable with that hand always being in movement. I can't stress it enough. It makes such a difference to being able to play the ukulele. The other thing that we want to talk about with this is fretting stuff, right? We talked about that little F add 9, but we didn't really talk much about how to play it. So I'm going to give you a couple really important pieces of advice when you're fretting an ukulele that I think will make playing so much easier for you. The first is position. Whenever you're fretting on the ukulele, a lot of times people think that you should just kind of put your finger right in between the fret wires, but that's not quite right. That doesn't actually give you the best sound. What's really critical about fretting an ukulele is when you're going next to a fret is you try to get all the way up next to that fret as close as you can. So in the case of this F add 9, I'm just fretting the first fret of my E string. And instead of my index finger being right in between, I'm getting it right up next to that fret wire. If I'm building this chord, it's, seems a little less important because I only have one finger. But what if we play like a G7 chord? Well, to do that, I'm going to take my middle finger and add it to the second fret of the C string. And then I'm going to add my ring finger to the second fret of the A string. So it looks something like this. The C string, the second from the top, is my middle finger. The index finger here is the first fret. And then the ring finger here on the second. Now you notice when I do this, I'm getting right up next to those fret wires because that is what's going to give me a really good fretting sound. If I'm more back here, I have to push much harder to get a good tone. In fact, if I'm right here in kind of a perfect position, I'm going to push only as hard as I have to, and I'll play through the chord. Sounds like this. I'm not going to push any harder or less hard. I'm going to push the exact same force, and I'm just going to move it back a little bit. And now I'm going to play that. You might notice that might sound more like how yours sounded when you started, right? Well, if I push harder, I can kind of make it work, but oh man, now I'm hurting my fingertips. I'm pushing so much harder than I need to be. The trick isn't to push harder, it's to push smarter. And the way to do that is make sure whenever you're pushing a chord and it's difficult to get a good sound, get each one of those fingers right up into those fret wires, right up next to it. And that can so dramatically improve your tone and control as you're playing. Again, I can't stress this part enough on how big of a difference it makes. And so if you're playing this F add 9 that we talked about, or a more complicated chord, it's the same stuff. Even a basic C chord, if you do it like that, it can be really hard. Try to squeak right up in there. And to go along with this fretting basic of the position, it's also how your finger angles should be, which sounds complicated, but all that means is with your fingers, you think about what controls the tone with your fretting hand. And if you think about your fingertip as the thing pushing down, right? So what controls your fingertip? Well, it's whatever the last knuckle that's sort of engaged is. And if you have your finger kind of bent like this, right? And you try to fret a note. So let's say like you're playing the F add 9, you're doing something like this. What is the point that actually controls the tip of the finger now? Well, it's this knuckle joint all the way up here because you've got no control here, right? You can't make little fine motor functions because it's all bent. You got no control. It's all coming from there. So whenever you're playing a chord, you want to make sure that that chord has that finger being more curved as you're doing it so that that can give you the control of the tip of the finger. It's much easier to control this much area rather than it is to control this much area. And it's a little different if you're doing a bar chord. We're going to talk more about that next week in our next session. But if you're playing a G7 chord, for instance, and you do something like this, you see how the fingers are all kind of bent back like that? That doesn't give me very good control. And I might accidentally hit a string I didn't want to, and that'll get that buzzing. So what I want to make sure is that I'm bending those fingers and articulating their angle just like that, so that I can keep as much control as possible. See how that one, and that one are all keeping very bent to be right in there for the motion. So important. And I didn't learn it until, I'd rather not say. It took me a long time to realize that. And it made such a big difference in my playing because I was in such better control. I was playing things. I'd play a simple chord and I'd get a buzz when I moved somewhere. I couldn't figure out why. It's like my fretting positions, right? What's going on? It's just when that finger is bent, you don't have the control. So just to recap, with our very first foundation concept of strumming and fretting, where we talked about the basic strumming pattern of using your index finger, flicking the nail over what we call the sweet spot strumming, which is this area where the fretboard meets the body of the ukulele, flicking it over those 4 strings with the nail going down, trying to turn your hand sort of like a doorknob motion while the finger flicks. And then on the up strum, we use the pad of the finger to kind of curl back up and point more towards our chin, using the same type of thing. We start practicing going down and up. And with that, we learn the law of ukulele strumming, which is what goes down must come up, and what comes up must go down. And to create variations with our strums, it's as simple as missing the strings. Occasionally, instead of striking the strings each time, we can elect to miss the strings. And that's how we create patterns like down, miss, down, up, miss, up, down, up, to create that sort of sound. In addition to that, we talked about some fretting things, how you want to get your fret wire all the way up to that so that you can get the best control and tone. If you're more back, it doesn't work very well. And we also want to make sure that our fingers are always in control, keeping those angles really, really nice on the fingers to maintain a really good sense of control as we're fretting. Just as a little preview, in our next session, we're going to be talking about some embellishments. So if you strum differently on the ukulele, maybe use your thumb. We're going to be talking about some ways to do other strumming to create kind of, warmer sounds using different fingers, or brighter sounds to create these different senses of accents and everything else. But it really is important that you get comfortable with that index finger strum before we move on to those. And we're also going to be working on some bar chords too as we continue this sort of foundations practice. So I'm going to open up to any questions you guys may have. The best way to do this is if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll sort of call on you, so to speak. And then, we'll see how that goes. And in our next session in 2 weeks, we're going to start off with another Q&A where we will talk about different things we worked on here in today's class, because while you have questions now, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions too after you practice it for a little while. And then we'll go into the next content and have a Q&A from there. So does anybody have any questions they would like to ask? Go ahead and raise your hand if so. It looks like Rosemary. Let's see, I'm just oh, no question? Oh, okay. Marlis, is that how you pronounce your name? Please let me know how to pronounce the name.
Yes, Marlis. Where is your thumb when you're on the fret, when you're holding it?
Mm-hmm. That's a fantastic question. Yeah, so where's the thumb? And one of the reasons why I don't talk about it at first is because unlike the guitar, which usually is taught to always keep the thumb squared behind kind of at all times, on the ukulele, you can really correctly fret 2 different ways. You can have your thumb more squared behind. In this case, I'm using the thumb just like that. You can see it's kind of a 90-degree angle. That will change depending on the chord. Sometimes it'll go more slanted towards my right shoulder or go away from the ukulele. This is a really good, stable way to play. But it's also correct, depending on the chord, to kind of have the thumb over the top of the ukulele a little bit and to be kind of cupped on this knuckleball right here. This is frowned upon in the guitar world. This is considered very bad, poor habits. But in the ukulele world, not so much, because we tend to use open strings a little bit more. And a lot of times we're going to be playing something that maybe moves up the neck quickly. Like if I'm playing something like this, it's really difficult to do something like that, holding it up with the thumb behind because the uke kind of falls out of my control. It's not like a guitar where it's big and just sitting on me. It's a little bit more of a balancing act. And so both of those are correct. With like the F add 9 chord that we talked about today, you can square it behind. That's great. Also, I think it's worthwhile to practice it where your finger is a little bit more angled with that thumb up here, which again, this looks wrong for a lot of guitarists. However, you know, when you watch some of the best players in the world play, they do this depending on what the situation is. So I'd recommend kind of practicing both. And as we go through different classes, we'll kind of specify when a chord needs the thumb out front here versus in the back, including in our next session when we talk about bar chords. Then we're going to need that thumb squared behind.
Okay.
So awesome. Any other questions at all? No questions. Oh man, Connie, yeah.
So you're strumming closer up to here, not over the sound hole.
That is correct. Yeah. And I'll explain why. It's a great question. With playing over the sound hole, that's where like a guitarist is oftentimes kind of taught to play, right? You know, they use the pick, kind of go down here and play. It creates a really bright sound. And there are times where we want that bright sound, and this is more correct. But we want to be able to control that brightness. And if we start here and start strumming here, everything is going to be this really, really, really bright sound. And it doesn't really give us a lot of opportunity to get much darker with our tone. And so this area is sort of a sweet spot to give you that balance of brightness, but also giving a little bit more warmth to the tone because the ukulele is such a bright instrument itself. If you listen to some of the best players, especially when they're playing kind of solo ukulele stuff, you know, like Jake Shimabukuro or guys like that, you'll notice that they really will be strumming over here for most stuff. And when they want to get a really in-your-face bright sound, they'll move down and use more nail. Those are things we'll be talking about in our next session as well, as we talk about embellishments on strumming. But this is just sort of the best way to start working with it. Another reason why this is such a great place to play is because of the fretboard right here. So most ukuleles have the fretboard meeting the body. And when I was growing up, I used to skateboard, and I now skateboard as an adult, which, you know, is a lot of fun. And if you've ever been on a skateboard and you try to go up a curb or something, and you just run into it, you will fly off the board and fall. And when you're strumming your ukulele, this is kind of like your skateboard, and the strings here are kind of like a curb. And as you go through, if you're strumming over the sound hole and you're digging in a little bit too deep, that finger can catch. And much like, you know, flying off a skateboard, you can catch. And I've cut myself on my finger before, you know, strumming the ukulele. And so it's a little more similar to skateboarding than you might think with that. And so that can hurt a lot and be a big problem. And so strumming more up here allows this little jump. So that's where the skateboard analogy comes in. It's like you put a little ramp up on the curb. And now when you ride to it, instead of stopping, you just go up that ramp, and your finger in this case will actually use that as a bit of a ramp to go over the strings, and it'll make sure that you don't biff it. And it's funny because if you look at my ukulele and many other players who play in this sort of style, their fretboard over here is worn down a bit from their fingers actually hitting the fretboard on occasion. It just acts as this little, you know, safety net for when you really want to strum fast, and it's another reason for it. So yeah, there's another question here. George says, hi, Matt, could you briefly talk about your nail length on each hand? Yes, so we'll probably eventually have a majority of a session donated to to nail length and all of that nonsense. But essentially, I keep my nails on my strumming hand a little bit longer, and I keep the nails on my fretting hand very, very short and well kept. And when I say a little bit longer, I really do mean a little bit longer. I don't have my nails super, super long. You can see here, you know, that's longer than your average dude's nail for sure. But it's not super, super long. My thumbnail, you can see, is just long enough to kind of come over. And the nails, I actually have longer, less for strumming and more for finger picking, which will be the second part of our quarter here with this fundamentals class. And so we'll talk a little bit more about nail care with some of the finger picking aspects. But what's most important is not the length, but how well you keep the nails. I literally have a little baby Yoda thing that a student got me that is just literally filled with nail files and nail care stuff. because it's a whole process to make sure that those nails are correctly shaped and correctly textured. So the more important thing than length is file them, keep them really smooth. Even if you don't care about playing with your nails, get something that can make your nails really smooth and use it, because it'll improve your playing. It's like getting a new ukulele. It's one of those things that's very easy to control overall and can make a big, big, big difference. So yeah, I see some other people with nail care stuff already in the videos, but yeah. So any other questions people have? And I can't stress this enough, throughout this whole quarter, there's no such thing as a dumb question. It does not exist. If it did exist, I have already asked it. I can guarantee you any question you have for me, I've already asked or have answered before. So do not ever feel bad if you think your question isn't, good enough. So any other questions at all? Oh, yes. Oh, I think we got to unmute here. I'll click the ask to unmute. There we go.
Thanks. Can you tell me, as far as holding it, a neck strap over trying to tuck it in with your elbow, what do you recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I did do a series here at the UKC where we talked about kind of like from zero to playing. And I spent a lot of time talking about how to hold it. So definitely check out that first video for extra stuff. I'm still gonna answer the question, but that'll go a little bit more in depth than just this answer. But I truly believe that holding the ukulele is the hardest part of playing it. And I'm not just saying that, I really do believe that. It took me years before it finally was like, oh, this just works and makes sense. The trick is that when you're holding an ukulele, you have to kind of balance it a little bit. So if I scoop back far enough so that you can start to see, my leg here, what happens is I put this lower bout on kind of my leg and I kind of pull it forward to where it hits my chest. And then I take this bout right here and I kind of pinch it back into me. So what's funny about this and what doesn't translate very well in video lessons is when you see me playing stuff, you see this, which looks like the ukulele is straight on and my chest is straight on, but my shoulders are not squared to you right now. If I square my shoulders to you, it looks more like this. Now my shoulders are squared and you can see the ukulele is sticking out a little bit. The reason for this is the back of the ukulele vibrates too. And if you're just pressing that up against your body, you're not getting nearly as good of tone as you could get. So having that little bit of separation is critical. And what that ends up meaning is that this is on the thigh. This is sort of pinched into the rib cage a little bit. And this arm is now kind of coming over this upper bout and trying to balance the whole thing to an extent. And if I take my left hand away, it's perfect. Nope. It's perfectly, nope. Yeah, I can't do it. It's not perfectly balanced where it just stays. It's an act of the left hand as well, getting in there and getting comfortable. And so when I'm finger picking, I might try to brace it a little bit harder to have more freedom. And it's tricky. It's just a tricky instrument, unlike a guitar, which you just kind of set like this. And, if you're playing a steel string acoustic, it just rests there, a little more finicky. And so that video will go more into detail with it. But you also asked about like neck straps and things like that, which is great. I do have a strap. It's somewhere over here. Here it is. And I use a strap every single time I'm teaching and standing. Or if I'm performing and standing. Pretty much anytime I'm standing with a ukulele, I will use a strap. And the reason I use the strap is very simple. I use the strap to simulate being seated. I don't use the strap to help as if, to just hold it, but rather if I'm seated like this and I stand to play, the strap will hold my ukulele in the same position as if I'm seated. And that's what I recommend for most people is get comfortable with it in your lap and seated. And then if you stand, grab a strap and just simulate it. At the same time though, it's difficult to hold this thing. And if you use a strap to assist holding it, that's fine. Like, what's the big deal about that? It's not the most ideal thing to do. It'd be nice to be able to hold it without a strap, but it's not the end of the world if you need a strap. And if the thing that's holding you back from playing is holding the darn thing, which I can really identify with, it's okay to put on a strap. I had a student who picked up the ukulele in I believe he was in his mid 70s, never played an instrument before in his life, wanted to play a concert ukulele and wanted to play classical style using finger picking. A lot of this, kind of like Bach style stuff, which is just like, whoa, okay, let's do it. From the get-go, I was like, you're using a strap. We're gonna get it in the best position possible because he's never played an instrument before. And we want to play this rich, difficult content. And that's the one thing he wants to do. Let's expedite that to the best of our ability, which meant put a strap, get it positioned so he could focus on the things he wanted to focus on. So yeah, the moral of this is just strap. I would recommend not using at first, but if you're really struggling, go ahead and use it. What's wrong with that? So any other questions at all? Doesn't look like it. Always, if you have questions, feel free to write them down too for our next session. Again, at the beginning of each session, we'll do a little bit of a Q&A to make sure that everything makes sense from the previous lesson. One of the most important things when you're doing music lessons isn't just when you're presented something, but when you go practice it and then you want feedback. And so that's what is really critical as we work through this is that feedback. I do see a question here from Teco saying, does it help to say the strumming pattern? For me, hugely so. For others, maybe not. Strumming is a very interesting thing because there are a lot of teachers that really don't like strum patterns. They think it's like wrong. But I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for strum patterns. Strum patterns for me gave me a vocabulary to be able to use. And so every single strum pattern and thing that I do, I can say because I needed to be able to do that to play it. So the short answer is it can. The long answer is figure out what works best for you. And if saying it helps you process it, I'd absolutely go for it. Talking ourselves through things can help a lot of times. So it's no different for strum patterns, for instance, saying the motions of down, miss, down, up, miss, up, down, up can sometimes be the difference between playing it or not. And when you start working on really crazy strum patterns, where you're doing something like down, miss, go step, down, miss, go step, down, miss, go step. Like I can say these at the speeds I need to practice them because it helps give me a physical relationship to it outside of just strumming. And then it's so easy to speed up based on that. So yes. Was there any other questions that I missed there? I wasn't sure if there was another hands up thing. Yeah, Mary.
Do you think when you're just learning, let's say the younger ones too, because I want to help teach my granddaughters this too.
Awesome. I love it.
Kids in there, but to do the down up or whatever it is instead of saying 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 or something like that, or yeah,
it's depends on the kid and the person learning. Sometimes as soon as you introduce numbers in something, for some people it's like, oh my god, wait, what are we doing? And then for other people it's like, yay, numbers, and so it just kind of depends on the person that you're working with. I think that trying both and leaning in towards whatever is working best for them ends up being the most successful for their learning process. But I would absolutely introduce both. I did say kind of when I was strumming it, that 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, because I do think it's an important sort of step to have in there. And as you learn more about strumming patterns and things like that, it can really help. Again, we did a from zero to playing thing last year here at the Ukulele Kids Club, and that is all available on YouTube, I believe. And so that goes a little bit more in depth with some of the counting of basic strum patterns, and so you can use that as a resource as well. But just kind of see what the kids are feeling most and lean into that. And the priority here is playing and having fun. So whatever facilitates that is the best way. Very cool. So any other questions at all? Awesome. Well, just as a reminder, we're doing this every other week starting at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. That's where I am. I think they show it in Eastern time, which I believe is 5:30 Eastern time, although it's a different time in Japan too, I think. So if, typing into a time converter can certainly help figure out what time it's at for you. But I will see you guys in 2 weeks for the next one, where we will be working on embellishments of strumming. Today was very sort of basic with some of this stuff, and next week's a little bit more advanced, but don't be scared if you're brand new, because it's still relatively simple concepts too. But thank you guys so much. I'll look forward to seeing you guys soon, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Take it easy.
Hey,
Thanks.
hey Matt, I shared this link, but just barely today when I saw it to a daughter of a friend of mine who's 16, and she's really a piano player, but she's been working on ukulele.
Awesome.
She likes it. So
Very cool.
if she missed this, but she's going to jump in next time, is there a way to see this
Yes.
video?
Yeah. So I believe Stephanie will, who sent this link, will be sending a YouTube video in the next couple days of this. So this whole thing will be available online as well, which is one of the goals with.
I think strumming was like the main thing with her, trying to and I
Yeah,
totally understand that because I still have an issue with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I started with piano in like second grade, and I I didn't like it, but I'm very glad I was forced to do it. But strumming and piano, those what? That's not, they're not the same at all. And with a piano, you know, the whole like clapping the hands concept, well, they press the key and they let go, but letting go doesn't do anything and is very quick. And so a lot of times for piano players, it's really hard to pick up the ukulele because it's so different. And so, yeah, I think that just starting to understand that consistent motion is most important, because a piano player is used to going like this. You know, they're used to these almost twitch-like motions to stay in rhythm. And we don't do that on the ukulele. It should all be regular pretty much all the time. Even going into double time, you're just sort of doubling up. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Cool. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody. I so appreciate you attending. I will see you guys in 2 weeks, and can't wait to see you then. Take it easy and have a good weekend. La 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 la.